There it comes. Okay. I'm glad everybody's well. I think what we're going to do, my plan now is to continue to do Lunch and Learn through the end of June. And then I think we're going to take a hiatus for a couple of months, take July and August off, and come back at the end of August so that, and we'll continue with something new in the fall. So that's going to be the plan at the moment until someone gives me a better idea.
We plan on
You're
doing
going to
holidays.
continue to do it on Zoom or on.
You know, I actually don't know. I actually don't know. Bert, you wanted what? You wanted a translation of Job? Is that what you want?
Yeah, you showed us the English when we had the discussion on the book of Job.
Yeah.
And I was interested in some of the particular verses, but I thought it might be easier if it's in PDF form, if you could just send me a reference to it. If not, it's okay.
I can send you my text. Yeah, I'll email you the text when I'm done with the session.
Oh, no rush.
I have them here. If you remind me, just come bang on the door. I'm right here, okay? Come down the block and I'll hand them to you.
I'll see you, Nina, and the puppy and the street.
Yeah, just attach a note to the puppy and I'll... Andy, how you doing?
Doing well. I apologize for missing last week.
It was brilliant. Absolutely, stunningly brilliant.
And of course I missed it. There was a rumor that because you have all this material now recorded, that you were just going to do a best of for those next 2 months.
Yeah, run reruns like the networks do. Yeah, Gilligan's Island over and over and over. 30 years on Gilligan's Island, right? No, we've done a lot of stuff. I mean, the truth is, if you go to the VBS page on YouTube, there's like a ton of stuff there now. I mean, it's hard to remember that for the last year and a half we've been doing this stuff. So, and there's a lot of lectures and a lot of interviews and a lot of other chazarai there. So, no, I think what we're going to do is take some time off. I may do a summer series of some sort. I'm talking to Rabbi Farkas because he'll be away for 1 month. I'll be away for a month. So we may split a summer series of some sort. I don't know exactly what it'll be yet.
The reason why I jokingly said that was because I explained to my father that I've been doing this, and he's like, "Oh, that's really cool." So I would send him the links. And he goes, "You didn't send me last week's link." I'm like, "Dad, I didn't even get onto it. I didn't see it." He goes, "Well, what? You can't get the rerun?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'll get to the rerun."
It's Fiddler on the Roof. You had a bad week. Why should I suffer? Right?
Exactly.
Are there plans to do the Torah class live again, or is that still?
I have right now, we are just trying to finish out the year, and we're working really hard on high holidays. That's really and we just started today talking about programs for next year, and we have a major programming conference next week to start thinking about the whole year. I don't know. I honestly don't. I would love to be back in person. The problem is Gelman now lives in Florida. Sherry lives here, so I could do it with Sherry here. I could do it myself, but it's no fun. It was more fun doing it with these other people. It was refereeing that wrestling match every week was fun.
Are the high holidays going to be on campus?
The high holidays, we are going to do both, actually, because we now have a presence online and we have a presence in person. So we're going to do full in-person high holidays, and then we're going to do full online high holidays. So in other words, we're doing double the work. We're going to do everything we did last year and everything we did the year before. The only thing that we did learn, and you'll laugh at this, is we discovered how to do short services. So I've been doing Shabbos in less than 2 hours, which is a miracle. Shabbos used to be 3 hours and 45 minutes. Now it's 2 hours max. And we're looking, last year, because we did it online, we did high holidays in 2 hours. And that was a 5-6 hour service. So we're going to do 2 services in the sanctuary that will be 2 hours long, one morning, one afternoon. We will do a traditional service in Malkin Burdorf that will be for people that want a really full davening. You can spend the whole day in shul. There's going to be a Sephardic service in the Sher Lapadi, and then there's going to be family services in the gym. That'll be what's on in person. And then online, we'll do the shorter high holiday service online. So those who can't be with us would like to watch us on TV, they can do that. That's the plan right now. It could change, who knows? The question is, do we require vaccination? Because if we require vaccination, we can have more people. But I'm not sure that's even legal. We don't know yet, so we'll see.
And now that you're having them online, you can say this bracha was brought to you by, and so forth. And
that's exactly right. Zion Talis. You know, when I walked in the shul, they thought I was a schlepper, but when I put on my Zion Talis, they knew I was a macher, you know. You too can be, you know. Just that kind of thing, right? Rabbi Feinstein's davening dynamics. Don't be the last one standing up for Shemona Esrei. Learn how to... You can daven faster than Herschel Fox. Anyway, thank you. So this is what we're working on these days.
Just think of the cushion shoes you can get for Neela.
It's really, I could I'll get a contract with Nike because it looks like a shofar. You know, the swoosh looks like a shofar, you know. When they say tekiah, be ready to hit the doorway, you know, with your Nikes. Air Feinstein, you know, don't you think? It has real Air Moses. It has real possibilities. All right, fellas, this has been fun. Appreciate this. Good. Any other pressing spiritual issues before we move on to the text?
Is Israel going to have a government?
It looks like it, and it looks like it's going to be a miracle because Naftali Bennett runs on a party called Yamima, which means to the right. I mean, he's a real right winger. He's more right wing than Netanyahu, and he's including Meretz in his Meretz is the Israeli equivalent of J Street in his cabinet. So this is going to be a unity government. The question is, can they hold it? Can they talk to each other? Can they work together? We'll see what happens. It may be a revolution in Israeli politics where people are willing to put aside some of their differences and actually work together for the sake of the country. We'll see what happens.
Today is the deadline, isn't it? To say
Well,
yes or no.
The good news that came out today, if you heard, was that they elected Buzzi Herzog president. And he's a wonderful soul. I've heard him speak a number of times, both in big settings and small. He's a very, very thoughtful, conscientious, deeply, deeply, deeply reflective Israeli leader. He's the son of the great ambassador and the general and the grandson of the chief rabbi. He's Irish on one side of his family. I mean, this is just a remarkable guy, and he's educated here, so he speaks perfect English and very, very thoughtful guy. And he spent the last several years as the head of the Jewish agency, so and he spent a lot of years in America, so he has a really clear sense of where Israel fits into world Jewry and Israel's responsibility to respond to the lives of the Jewish people worldwide. So I think this is a tremendous gift to the people of Israel. And he's not a flamboyant politician. He's a very quiet, soft-spoken, carefully thoughtful leader. So that'll be great. Now, what happens in the rest of the government, you know, God only knows. They've had 4 elections. They may finally decide they'll make a government. We'll see. And then what happens to Netanyahu when he's not in government, how he survives. I mean, it's going to be very interesting. Maybe he'll move to Mar-a-Lago or something. I don't know. So but I'm looking at the list. They publish what they think the list is of the government, who's going to be in which cabinet position, and it's quite remarkable how broad this coalition is. You know, from the very right to the very left. So you can see how much they're ready to get rid of Netanyahu if they're willing to work together with that kind of a coalition. It's amazing.
What is Lapid going to have, defense or foreign ministry?
Yeah, well, Lapid will start out as the foreign minister, and then I think there's a rotation. And within, I think, 2 years, he gets to be the prime minister, and Bennett becomes the foreign minister.
If the government lasts 2 years, I hope it does.
And Benny Gantz is the defense minister, and I forgot who the finance person is. Anyway, it's just really Gideon Sarr, I think, is the finance minister. It's a very interesting group of people. Very, very interesting. And look, it might work. I mean, it may be time for for complete realignment of Israeli politics, and that's what this would represent.
Does it require supporting of Arab parties in order to become a 61?
No,
61 votes.
no, but
Jewish
they
vote?
will invite the Arab parties to join. And whether the Arab parties will sit down with a guy like Naftali Bennett, who was a very passionate advocate of the settler movement, remains to be seen. But right now, the Arab parties are beginning to smell something which they've never been able to detect before, which is that if you get more out of the government if you're in it than if you're out of it. You know, and the idea that even considering being in the government and joining the coalition means that they could get, you know, that's how Israeli politics works. You get the funding for schools, the funding for, you know, for public works, the funding for other kinds of things. And the Arab parties are now seeing that this is something they might want to do. So you could, for the first time, have an Arab participation in the coalition. Very interesting. Just a very interesting. And then the ultra orthodox is another question. You know, the ultra orthodox are pledged to Netanyahu, so they're pledged to be in the opposition. But the ultra orthodox don't care; they just want to get what they want to get. So they may decide that it's more worth their while to join a coalition, even though they may not particularly like everybody in the coalition. That's what this whole thing is about. It's people you can't stand you're starting to work with because you realize it's time to set aside differences and work together. We'll see. We'll see what happens. Could be very, very interesting government. Could, as Bert said, we'll see if it lasts. You know, you ever been to a wedding and you said to yourself, "Dang, I ain't gonna last." You know, eat the sushi because by the time it's gone, this couple may not be together. You know, and then sometimes it lasts. I mean, I know people that are married years and years and have kids because, I never thought in a million years. And then there's other couples that you never know. So we'll see what happens here. It's a tremendous realignment of Israeli politics. Okay, let's do some text, shall we? We've been looking at the books of Ketuvim, the books at the end of the Hebrew Bible, the third section. And among those books, we saw that there are 5 Megillot, 5 short books read in scrolls during liturgical moments of the Jewish year. The most famous one we looked at already is Esther, which is read, of course, as part of Purim because it is the story of Purim. And then Song of Songs, which is read at Pesach, Lamentation, Eicha, which is read at Tisha B'Av, Kohelet, which is read at Sukkot, sorry, and this book, Ruth, which is read at Shavuot. It is a charming book. It is a sweet little love story, and it has, like all of these books, a tremendous statement to be made. And I think this is one of the things that makes this literature so sophisticated, which is that you sort of have to see the relationship between the literary form of the book, how it presents itself as a story, and the message of the book. When we did Esther, I suggested to you that what we have in Esther is a very bitter political and philosophical lesson about how you remain moral and how the Jewish people survives in a world governed by a mad, foolish king. That is the bitter, nasty lesson of hard-boiled politics and how politics works under those circumstances and how morality works under those circumstances. But it was encapsulated and told to us in a crazy, ribald sex comedy where everyone's always drunk and at a party. And that the contrast between the bitterness of the message and the goofiness of the story is on purpose. Because if you have to deliver a bitter message, the best way to do it is in a goofy story. And then on the one hand, that protects you from those who aren't ready to hear the message. There's a Hebrew phrase, Hamevin Yavin, the one who understands will get it. So if the reader is a simple-minded person or a child, they're going to see the story and see, isn't it cute? It's a funny story about Esther and Mordecai and a bad guy named Haman. But for those who can read a little deeper, can understand that what we have here is a very sophisticated political drama dressed up as a farce, as a comedy, and that the comedy protects it. And that not just that, but it's easier to remember, it's easier to absorb it if it's in that form. Well, here too, I want to suggest that what we have is a very serious, this isn't a bitter message the way Esther was. This is a serious message. It is a serious question of identity and boundaries. What are the boundaries of the Jewish people? What is our identity? Who is in and who is out? Who is the us and who is the them? Who are the residents and who are the aliens? And who is an immigrant? And it's a cultural question. And the question of who we are is a very important question, and has always been a very important question through the course of Jewish history. Who do you include and who don't you include? Who belongs and who doesn't belong? And today that issue presents itself in a couple of ways. One of it is in Israel, for example, about who's a citizen of Israel and who's not, and who deserves to have a place in the Israeli polity and who doesn't. That's one set of issues. But here too, the whole question of what we are as a people, and what kind of, a community, a people, a group defines itself. And one of the ways it defines itself is by setting a boundary and saying, this is who we are and this is who we're not, you see. And so the question of where we belong, of what that boundary is and how one crosses that boundary and what happens when you cross the boundary. These are the kinds of questions that are being asked in this particular book. And that can be very difficult. That can be a very difficult conversation. So I want to show you a contrasting text for just a moment, a text that's going to show a different answer to that very, very difficult question. Okay, at the end of the Hebrew Bible, we have a number of these sort of miscellaneous books. And one of those books is called Ezra. Now, the story of Ezra is the historical account of what happened when the Persian government conquered, or didn't really conquer, they supplanted Babylon. When the Persians supplant Babylon, the Persian emperor Cyrus decides that it's in his interests to allow the Jews to return to Eretz Yisrael and to rebuild their temple, because that way his kingdom has a Western front. And if the Jews are his allies, then they will protect his Western front from any European incursion. Okay. So he allows the community to go back. So the community's been living in exile in Babylon for 75 years. And he says, okay, you can go back. And he actually pays to have them go back and buy building material, pays for the building materials so that the Jews can begin rebuilding their temple. But it's a very difficult struggle. First of all, Jews have now been living in Babylon for 2 generations. They don't want to go back. They like it in Babylon. It's free, it's prosperous, they have homes and businesses that they've built. And so it is difficult to encourage Aliyah to Israel. Number 2, the problem was that the local tribes that had taken over the neighborhoods of Jerusalem since the Jews departed 75 years earlier weren't so eager to have a Jewish community return and take over that property once again. And they were harassing the process of building the temple. So Cyrus sends 2 officials. First, his cupbearer, Nehemiah, and cupbearer means national security advisor, a senior administration official, to sort of help the process of defending the city, rebuilding the city of Jerusalem, its walls, and rebuilding the temple. And then he sends his scribe, a man named Ezra, who is a very serious official in the Persian government. And Ezra goes back, and Ezra engineers a religious revival in the city of Jerusalem as the temple is being completed. Now, here's what he discovers. It's been 75 years since we left. Half of the community was taken to Babylon. Half of the community stayed behind in Eretz Yisrael. The community that went to Babylon developed a religious culture, and they bring that religious culture back with them. And specifically, what they bring back with them is the Torah. The Torah is edited and compiled and assembled in exile, which means that the Jews who were in exile had the Torah, but the Jews who were staying behind in Jerusalem didn't. And so there's a shift, there's a difference in their religious custom. And one of the religious customs that it shifts during that time is the prohibition against intermarriage. That is, up until then, a Jewish man could marry a non-Jewish woman and nobody minded. Nobody minded, because, Moses marries a Midianite princess. It's perfectly okay. She becomes Jewish as she marries him, right? She becomes Jewish as she enters the people. But when you read the book of Deuteronomy, it says, don't marry the people of the land. Marry only within your own circle. So the whole question of who you get to marry changes when the Torah is compiled. So now Ezra comes back and he finds a community, and guess what they've been doing for 75 years? They were observing the old custom. And what was the old custom? Men marry whoever they want, and the woman then comes into the community and becomes Jewish as she marries and joins the community. Ezra reads the Torah to this community, and when he reads the Torah to this community, they discover that what they've been doing is wrong. And there's big punishments for that, according to the Torah. So here's the scene. Let me put it up on the screen so we can all read it together. This is from the book of Ezra, right? So they come to him, they come to Ezra, and they say, we have sinned. We married local women. We didn't know it was against the law. And the question is, what do we do now? What do we do now? While Ezra prayed and made confession, weeping and casting himself down before the house of God, because the community is now in a deep state of sin because they all intermarried, right? A very great assembly of men, women, and children gathered to him out of Israel, for the people wept bitterly. And Shechaniah, the son of Yechiel, the son of Elam, addressed Ezra, we have broken faith with our God and have married foreign women from the peoples of the land, which, remember, was allowed before. Moses did it, right? But now it's not allowed anymore. Even now there is hope for Israel in spite of this. Therefore, let us make a covenant with our God to put away all these wives and children, according to the counsel of my Lord, and of those who tremble at the commandments of our God, and let it be done according to the law, to the Torah. In other words, the only solution that they could figure out was divorce your wives and reject your children, because they're all foreigners and you're not allowed to have them in your homes. And that was the solution. So according to the book of Ezra, what is the boundary between us and them? It's a bloodline. It's a bloodline. And the only way to be part of us is to be part of our bloodline. It doesn't recognize the idea that a woman could marry a man, and by marrying him, she becomes part of the people Israel, which was the custom before, nor does it know anything about conversion. It simply says, if you're a Jew, you're a Jew. If you're not a Jew, you're not a Jew. And a Jew can't marry a non-Jew. That's illegal. And the only solution was to divorce all their wives. You see, that was one solution to the problem. That was one way of understanding us and them, our people and those people, the boundaries of membership, the boundaries of loyalty. Okay? Now we come to the book of Ruth, and we have a different opinion. So here's what's happened so far for those who've been with us. There was a man named Elimelech, and he took off and moved his family to the country of Moab, because there was a famine in Israel. And in the country of Moab, Elimelech and his two sons died, leaving his wife Naomi and her two daughters-in-law, Ruth and Orpah. Orpah goes back to her family at Naomi's urging, but Ruth says, don't let me go back. I will stay with you through thick and thin. And so Ruth and Naomi go back, and they end up back in Bethlehem. And when they show up in Bethlehem, it's been 10 years since they were away. And the image that the Bible draws for us is a woman who wears her grief on her face. And people say, can this possibly be Naomi? Can this possibly be Naomi? Look at her. It doesn't look like her. And she responds and says, don't call me Naomi, which means sweetness. Call me Mara, which means bitterness. I went away full and I came back empty. And then this part of the section ends by saying, thus Naomi returned from the country of Moab. This is the end of the first chapter. She returned with her daughter-in-law, and I pointed out that she gains a last name. Up until now, she's just been called Ruth, but now it's Ruth the Moabite. Now, Moab is a country to our east. It's where Jordan is today. The Moabites were said to be the descendants of Lot, right? And therefore, they're cousins, except when we came across the desert, the Moabites would not give us an easement, safe passage through their land. They tried to block us and impede our progress to the promised land. And so we went to war with the Moabites, and the Moabites remain enemies of the Jewish people forever. So when one says Ruth the Moabite, the answer to the resonance to that is Ruth the outsider, Ruth the alien, Ruth the other, or to use a common Yiddish expression, Ruth the shiksa, the one who doesn't belong. They arrived in Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest, and that's when Shavuos is celebrated. Okay, we good so far? That's a catch-up. Everybody good so far? Okay, let's go on now. Ready? Now, Naomi had a kinsman on her husband's side, a man of substance, of the family Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. Now, so Elimelech, the husband, he's the one who picks himself up during the famine and goes off to Moab, even though the entire Torah is about coming home. The entire Torah is about the claim of the land. Remember, the land was given to Abraham. So it's part of our identity. It's part of our covenant. The land is part of the deal. And it's all about rooting yourself in the land and the community that lives on the land. But Elimelech rejected all of that and went off to a strange land, went off to Moab. Boaz is his other side, say his shadow or his alter ego. Boaz, the cousin, he's the one who stayed. In Hebrew, Boaz can be divided into two words, bo-oz. In him, bo-oz is strength. What's his strength? He is the man of roots. He stays through the famine. He stays through the catastrophe. He doesn't leave the land. He stays there. Ruth, the Moabite, because that's what she is now in Israel, in Judah, said to Naomi, I would like to go to the fields and glean among the ears of grain behind someone who may show me kindness. So the custom in Israel, and I suspect it was the custom elsewhere because Ruth knows about it, is that if you're poor, you go and you glean a field. Gleaning a field means you follow the reapers, and anything the reapers don't get, anything the reapers drop, you get to pick up and take home for yourself, right? It's sort of like that. You ever go to the back of the supermarket, there's a big rack full of day-old stuff that's at 1/3 of the price. That's the idea. The poor can come and take anything that the reapers don't get through their first pass through the field. She knows this law. She and Naomi have no means of support. They're completely impoverished. And so she says, I'll go and get us food. And all Naomi can say is, yes, daughter, go. Now, Naomi is an interesting study here in a woman who is bereft. When someone has suffered terrible loss, they can only live in the present tense. They can't bear to think about the past, and they have no future. And Naomi has no future. She is really, I mean, the images, she's just melted. I mean, one of the things I think, one of the images that I carry as I think about this, imagine just this, imagine Naomi coming home, where they went away for 10 years. They didn't know how long they'd be away. So they didn't sell the house. The house is still there. She still has the keys. So they go into the house. And they were probably a well-off family. So it's a nice house on a square in town. And she has to play with the key because it's been 10 years, so it's kind of rusty. She opens the house and it smells awfully musty in there. You know, so you open the house and you open the windows to get some light and some air in there. And now for a moment, imagine with me as Naomi, poor Naomi, walks around that house. Each room, right? First you go to where? What's the first room? I guess you go into the living room, right? And what's in the living room? Well, remember, when she left 10 years earlier, her sons were young. So there's mementos, toys, pictures, and everything she sees just breaks her heart because it's the pictures of the life she left behind. It's a sort of time capsule of who she was before all this catastrophe struck her, right? And then maybe she goes upstairs to the living quarters, and there's the bedrooms of her sons. Remember that movie? Robert Redford won an Academy Award for a movie called Ordinary People. Remember that movie? And part of the scary part was, Timothy Hutton is the surviving son. The older kid was killed in a boating accident, but Mary Tyler Moore doesn't want to accept the fact that he's dead. So she keeps the kid's bedroom exactly as it was the day he died, even though it's been years already. Imagine, so Naomi walks into the bedrooms of her sons that were kept the same way since they left 10 years earlier. And here is a representation of the life that could have been, that was and could have been. And then she walks into her marital bedroom, the life that should have been. And each time she walks into another room and confronts what she's lost, a little bit of her dies. And then, so by the time she finishes this tour of the house, there's nothing left. And when Ruth says, we're hungry, we should go get food, all Naomi can say is, yes, daughter, go. Those are the only 3 words she can articulate. This is a woman who is just distraught and destroyed by her grief. And off Naomi goes, and off Ruth goes. So Ruth is now wandering the town looking for a field that she can glean. And she came and gleaned in a field. Remember, the town is it's an agricultural town. So right outside the town are the fields, right? Behind the reapers. And as luck would have it, it was a piece of land that belonged to Boaz, who was the family of Elimelech. Well, there's no luck in the Bible, right? But it's bamikre. It just so happened that's the language. It just so happened that. But there's no such thing as it just so happened that. It was Boaz's field. Of course it was Boaz's field. That's how this is going to work out, right? So Boaz arrives from Bethlehem. Boaz comes into town. Now, Boaz is an older guy. He's Elimelech's contemporary. It's her father-in-law's contemporary. He's the landowner. So he greets the reapers, Adonai Yimachem, and they say, Baruch Adonai. If you ever listen to when one of our Persian friends has an aliyah to Torah, that's the formula they use. They come to the Torah and they say, Adonai Yimachem, the Lord be with you, and we all respond, Baruch Adonai, right? And Boaz said to the servant in charge of the reapers, whose girl is that? She's a servant girl. She's a daughter. I don't recognize her. I mean, Boaz is a man who lives in town, and he's the one who stayed. So he knows everybody in the town. He's never seen this young woman before, right? And perhaps she's a striking looking young woman. The servant in charge says she is the Moabite girl who came back with Naomi from the country of Moab. Translation, she's the Shiksala who came back from Shiksal land. She's the alien, the other, right? In other words, yeah, she's of no account, or rather, she shouldn't be here altogether. She's not one of us. She's a stranger, right? And she said, let me glean and gather among the sheaves of the field from the reapers. And she was been on her feet ever since she came. She's rested but a little. That's how the reaper sees her. We don't know the reaper's name, but we know how he sees her, because how he sees her is how everyone sees her. That's how she is seen in this community. She is an outsider who doesn't belong. Moabites don't belong in Judea. They shouldn't be there. She doesn't belong. Boaz said to Ruth, oh, wait a minute, that's not right. Because everywhere Ruth is introduced since she came back to Judea is what? She's always Ruth the Moabite. But Boaz said to Ruth, what's missing? The Moabite. Because Boaz doesn't see her that way. Because Boaz sees what nobody else can see. Because in the Bible, the essence of prophecy is not your ability to talk fancy. The essence of prophecy is your ability to see. And what does Boaz see? Boaz sees Ruth the Moabite. And what does he say to her? He says to her, right? I'm going to open the door here for my friend. He says to her, he speaks to her in a way that nobody else speaks to her. And why does he speak to her that way? Because he sees what nobody else can see. He sees that in some very deep way, wherever she came from is irrelevant. The truth of her character is what qualifies her to be there. And he says to her, listen, my daughter. Right away, that's a different language than the outsider. Don't go glean in another field. Don't go elsewhere. Stay here close to my girls. So in the same way that Naomi tried to push her off 3 times, remember, go home to your family, go home to your gods, go home to your culture. I have nothing to give you. What does Boaz do? He has 3 words of invitation. Don't go glean in another field. Don't go anyplace else. Stay here close. This is the opposite of what Naomi said to her when Naomi was trying to push her off. Stay here close. Keep your eyes on the field. Follow them. I'll order men not to molest you. And when you're thirsty, go drink the water. Now, she can't believe he's this way. And she throws herself on the ground and she says, why are you so kind to single me out when I am a foreigner? This is the Bible's making sure you know how radical his position is. And he says to her this, I've been told of all you did for your mother-in-law after the death of your husband, how you left your father and mother in the land of your birth and came to a people you had not yet known. May the Lord reward your deeds. May you have full recompense from the Lord God of Israel, under whose wings you have sought refuge. And she answered, you're most kind, right? Even though I'm lower than your maidservants. And at mealtime, she invited him to eat with them, partake of the meal, dip your morsel in the vinegar, come and eat with us, right? And he gave her food. And when she got up to glean, he made sure that everyone would take care of her. And she gleaned and she beat out, she threshed her own grain and she brought it home. She brought it home and Naomi sees it and says, how did you get so much? And she says, it was this guy Boaz. Where did you glean today? Where did you work? Blessed be he who took such generous notice of you. And she said, the man is Boaz. But Naomi's response is, blessed be he of the Lord who has not failed in his kindness to the living or the dead, for the man is related to us. Now that phrase is also indicative because this phrase here, who has not failed in his kindness to us, the Hebrew is lo azav chasdo. Lo didn't, azav abandon his chesed, his kindness to us. The word azav, which means to abandon, if you reverse the letters, it's Boaz. That's the other meaning of the name Boaz. But I want to go back up to his statement because his statement is just critical. Listen to what he says to her. Listen to me. Don't go to glean in another field. That's such a beautiful phrase because he's not just talking to her. He's talking to spiritual seekers. I've come across in my life people who are seekers. I don't know if you've ever met people like this. I mean, there's this one young woman who came to talk to me. She wanted to convert to Judaism. So I'm asking her, like, tell me your story. Where are you from? And she tells me her story. She was born a Mormon and was raised in the Mormon faith. When she got to college, she abandoned the Mormon faith because it no longer made sense to her, and she became an evangelical Christian. And she loved that for a while. And after a while, she discovered Native American faith. So she gave up evangelical Christian and became a sort of practitioner of Native American faiths. And then one day she was invited to a Sufi gathering and she fell in love with Sufi. So she ran away with a bunch of Sufi people and spent months on a Sufi commune doing dancing and doing Sufi stuff. And then from Sufism, she discovered Hasidism and decided that she wanted to become Jewish because now she was a seeker. She was seeking connection with God. And what she was doing was sort of shopping. And each of these iterations was another sort of stop along her journey. I told her, you don't need to convert, but I'm glad to learn with you. So we learned for a while. And then one day she stopped coming. And I called her. I said, are you okay? Is everything right? She said, yeah, I've just discovered the next iteration was some sort of form of Buddhism that she had discovered. And I gave her my blessing and said, good, keep going. One style of spiritual search is to sort of try out every world religion and see what they have to say. And I've met people like this young woman. And, you know, I understand what she's looking for. The question is, if you don't root yourself in a faith, if you don't really live it, if you remain a sort of spiritual tourist, will you ever really discover the wisdom and depth and power of any particular spiritual system? That's the question. And the book of Ruth comes down on the side of Boaz, who is a man of roots, the man who is rooted in his community, rooted in his covenant with God, rooted in his people, rooted in his faith, even with all of its problems. And God knows Judaism has problems, Christianity has issues, Buddhism has issues. Every religion has things in it you don't love. But by rooting yourself in it, that's the only way to really discover its truth. You can't discover it simply by visiting. You've got to actually live there. And what he says to her is, here's the man of roots who stayed in the community, unlike Elimelech who left. He stayed, and he says to her the same thing. Here is where you want to be. Root yourself here. Don't go glean in another field. Don't go looking for truth anyplace else, because you're not going to find it. Because by wandering from place to place to place, you're not going to find it. Only by rooting yourself. The strategy of roots is the only way to find spiritual truth. And then the next question is really very interesting. And this is something that many scholars have proposed, which is that at some level, all the spiritual systems come together as one. But the only way to find that universal truth, the great, what they call perennial truth, is to root yourself in one of them and follow it all the way to the end. All the way to the end. And the tourist attitude, this sort of sample, the smorgasbord, sample a little here and sample a little there, that'll never get you to that depths of truth. The only way is to root yourself and really stay in a truth. And that's what Boaz says to her in a spiritual system. And then when he compliments her with such a remarkable language. And you can see what it's resonant with, right? Right. Boaz, I've been told all you did for your mother-in-law, the death of your husband, how you left your father and mother and the land of your birth. Now, who else did that? Abraham did that. Leave your family, leave your home, leave your native land, and follow me where I send you. Ruth follows in the footsteps of Abraham, but she doesn't talk to God the way Abraham did. She did it out of loyalty to her mother-in-law and out of a search for the truth that the Jewish people, the Israelite people have. And that's the wonderful thing. So now we have two different models. We have a model which says, the Ezra model, which says you're Jewish because you're born into the Jewish people. That's the only way to be part of us. And then you have this other suggestion from Boaz, which is that I'm looking for people who have a certain quality of loyalty, a certain quality of loving kindness, certain qualities of character qualify you to be counted among the Israelite people much more than the place of your birth. And he says, you belong here, not because you were born here, not because you were born of Israelite parents or genetics. You belong here because you belong here. That's who you are. And that's what he talks about. All right, let's stop here. Questions, comments, counter sermons. Yes, Douglas. You have to unmute so I can hear you.
Sally, can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
The Ezra model that you talked about, that the people did not know the Torah. You're quoting from Deuteronomy, which was only discovered in Jerusalem less than a century earlier from King Josiah. So then how would they not know Deuteronomy at the time?
How do they not know it?
Yeah, I mean, how did they? I mean, was it just a book out there? It didn't hit Amazon's bestseller list or something like that?
Yeah, the question is, did the laws of Deuteronomy really spread through the kingdom? Remember, Josiah finds Deuteronomy and starts that process of reform of the temple by destroying all the local altars and the bamot, right?
Yeah.
But he dies young in battle, and his descendants, Manasseh, isn't nearly as loyal to this as he was. And you end up with a number of Achaz who follows him. The kings who follow Josiah reverse the reform. So it's very possible that the teachings of Deuteronomy never penetrated the population. Plus the fact that you got to remember something. Judaism as its practice is not what's written in the books. I don't know if you know this, but not every family at Valley Beth Shalom keeps kosher. Even though that's pretty clearly written in a book. Not every family at Valley Beth Shalom makes Shabbos. And Valley Beth Shalom is a select population because those people who bother to join a shul, much less the larger Jewish community. So a spiritual truth doesn't necessarily penetrate the population, even though we might read it in a book. Okay? It's David.
The thing that really strikes me about what you were talking about, you said, is that it's a sweet story, in the sense that I'm sure no different then than now with the issue of the other and dealing with the other.
Right.
And it seems to me, rightly or wrongly, that right now that's the last, whatever, that's particularly strong at the moment. And interesting, you were starting off talking about Israel, which may have a coalition from far left to far right for the first time in, I don't know, ever. And I just wonder what, I guess part of it is I wonder what the response was. Part of it is I think about, here we are learning this, and yet the issue of the other is still such an issue. It's a wonderful, cozy story. I just want to crawl inside that world and live there.
Yeah.
You know? I just want to be there. But I'm not there, and it's a fairy tale in a way, sweet story.
Yeah.
It's a great teaching, learning for us to look at, but how do we get there, and what was the response then? And I don't know if there's any evidence about that. I don't know if that matters. It's sort of negotiating this story and applying it in whatever world you live in is sort of the question in my mind.
Very nice way to put the question. Look, I can show you this. It's a little bit late to it now, but I'll show it to you one of our later sessions. This debate goes on. It is a debate that goes on all through Jewish history, through the rabbis, through the medievals, into the modernity, even today, about what are the boundaries of membership, what qualifies you to be in and out, right? And the problem is that as sweet as this story is, and you're right, it is such a delightful story, and he is such a hero, and you just love him, The problem is you're up against a whole bunch of psychological and sociological factors, right? The sociological factor is that when you oppress a people, they erect psychological boundaries, right, in order to protect themselves so they don't internalize the oppression. So the Jewish people, as they're oppressed over the course of the medieval years, both by the Christians and the Muslims, decide that we are the chosen people and everyone else is a barbarian. Right? My Bubby and Zeta, who were nice European Jews, who really were very liberal in their attitudes, but they had, my Bubby could sometimes get, really angry, and she would just talk about goyim feh, which was her way of saying anyone who isn't on our side is a barbarian. Now, I think I gave a sermon about this once where I said, the thing is that for my Bubby, like if you were black, you were Jewish. If you were Latino, you were Jewish. If you're Asian, you were Jewish. If you were gay, you were Jewish. She had a big picture of Martin Luther King on the wall. And I used to say, Bubby, what? He's not from the Goyim? She said, no. Martin Luther King is from the Schwarz, and the Schwarz is, son in Yidden, Black people are all Jews. Why? Because they know oppression. They're like us. They're a minority, and then we didn't eat grapes because of Cesar Chavez. And no, the Mexicaners are son in Yidden, So her idea was that that's how the world, but that's a psychological barrier. That's a psychological barrier to protect you from the oppression, you see? And that exists in Jewish life that pushes the other away. And then you have Maimonides. You'll hear that in many. You have Maimonides, who's one of the great, champions of Judaism as an intellectual system, who says, if you think like us, you are like us. You know, it's a wonderful takeoff on Descartes. You know, cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. For Maimonides, it's cogito ergo Yidden. You know, I think, therefore I'm Jewish. You know, the world is divided not between Jews and non-Jews. The world is divided between reflective people and stupid people, right? It depends on which side I mean, that's how Maimonides understood the world, seriously. So this is a big argument because there's all these problems. You know, how do you, and I deal with this all the time. I get people who convert to Judaism. They're the most delicious Jews. They are wonderful people. And yet she'll come and she'll cry with me and she'll say, my mother-in-law will never accept me because I can't make matzo balls. You know, she can read Hebrew. She knows the davening. She learns Torah. I can't make matzo balls. Like, what? And I've had a guy dealing with a family right now. Guy converts to Judaism to marry this wonderful girl. He's a terrific kid. Really excited about becoming part of us. His father-in-law won't accept him. He said, well, no, it's not really. You can't accept a convert. You never know. You know, I was like, what are you talking about? The guy studied for a year, for God's sakes. He comes to shul more than you do, you know. But these are the psychological barriers. So this sweet story goes up against a great deal of psychology and sociology, I'm afraid. But thank you. It's a great question. Let's go. Bert Siegel, you're next.
I guess the thought that flitted through my mind when we talked about the other, and to go back to your early discussion about the government, how might the new government deal with who's a Jew? That question just sort of bothers me. There's enough problem. I'm not looking for an answer. I just want to throw
No, but you see, what's interesting is this government at this moment doesn't include any of the Orthodox parties. Now, Bennett wears a kippah, but it doesn't include any of the ultra-Orthodox parties. If it doesn't include any of the ultra-Orthodox parties, there's a lot more latitude to make policy in a way that we would find, we would appreciate. And Lapid comes from that background. Lapid's father was a big crusader against the ultra-Orthodox. So we'll see,
Okay.
Yeah, Stanley.
We were talking about continuity as to what people remembered from generations past. To me, in biblical times, it's a wonder that communities remember almost anything. They didn't have newspapers or books or internet or anything. They had to only know what was passed down. And yet we've had this continuity from generation to generation. In those days, is a miracle.
Yeah, it is. It's amazing. It's just amazing, so we'll see. All right. So I got more. Burl, you're next, please. And then Douglas again.
Just in terms of contemporary issues and all this anti-Semitism, this is not a rhetorical question. I wonder to what extent the anti-Semitism that is now pervasive and probably will get worse is going to unite the Jews, particularly in the diaspora. I don't know the answer.
The question is what anti-Semitism unites the Jews, but it also changes us. It makes us more suspicious. It makes us more critical of each other. We're the only people in the world that when we face an external threat, we start beating on each other. I mean, you read the Jewish newspapers. There's more internal rage than rage at the bad guys outside, right? It's used as a club to beat on each other, and that's one of the really sad things. So I hope that you're right. I hope it does unite us. I hope that we can set aside differences and care for each other. I fear that what you get instead is a further radicalization of the polarizing effect that, our side is the only people defending the Jewish people. You're a bunch of traitors, right? If you criticize the Israeli government, you're contributing to anti-Semitism. You hear this, and that's, again, only the Jews. You face an external threat, we kill each other. Just there's a reason why the reason why the Messiah hasn't come. There's a reason why that we were in exile for 1800 years, and that's the problem. We have a very hard time uniting, even with external threats. Very strange people, you and us, our people, right? Douglas, you get the last comment, then I'm going to go eat lunch.
Historical context of the book. When was it written?
Nobody knows. It seems to be relatively early. You'll see at the very end. I'll give away the end, okay? It's the birth story of King David. Now, whether that was the original context of the story or whether that was added at the end as a way to legitimize the book is a really good question, right? It appears to be relatively early. That is First Temple period, not Second Temple period, right? That is earlier than Kohelet, probably earlier than Job, right? It has that sort of sweetness. The language is very simple language. There's no Aramaic. There's certainly no Greek. So it seems to be a very early book, but what the exact content and how it was edited, that I can't, no one knows this. You can write a PhD on your theory of this, okay? All right, folks, it's been a joy learning with you as always. Take good care of each other. Torah study Shabbos morning, of course. Nice bar mitzvah this week and an ufruf, which we can all use. And then we'll study again next Wednesday, okay?
Thank you.